Yeah, that's him. There we go. There's those three wonderful people. Do we have a... Yeah, so there's the Slido bit up there. I was, of course, greedy as usual. Brilliant. Thanks, Max. But I was not only greedy, but I was lazy. I got Sandy to type my questions in whilst I was sitting there. So greedy and lazy. Who does that remind you of? Right. Okay. So we've got a few questions up here. So I'll start with Paul's one, because obviously you've asked the question rather than me bombarding the system with questions. So I think this is one for Pete right at the very beginning, and perhaps actually probably for all three of you. Regarding the investment into new projects, how or who would fund a project up to the 80% maturity prior to a potential investment?
That's the issue, isn't it? That's the reason why projects are not fundable, because there's no money to actually design up to 80%. So where's the equity in the project to design a model up to a specific percentage that's acceptable to the other side of the fence, the finance people?
So what you're sort of saying here is that we need to front load projects a hell of a lot better. We don't invest enough time in the preliminary design or the feasibility study. What we do is we end up throwing all the money into the construction world rather than actually making sure that it is a lower risk construction project. Yeah?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to agree with that. I'll come at it from a different angle on construction. I'm still relatively new in this infrastructure space. 3.5 years as opposed to 30 odd in defence. But if I look at the product world, this whole notion of left shifting and upfront investment has been based around the wrong question. It's been based around ROI, return on investment. And once the money folk look at the numbers that come up and go, yeah, if we invest in model-based engineering, model-based systems engineering, we should save 10, 20%. Number doesn't really matter. What instantly comes then is a 10 or 20% cut off the budget for your project. Now, the problem is the return on investment doesn't actually come from that left shift in itself. It comes from using that left shift and that upfront investment to understand the defects that you normally got later in the life cycle. So, and you don't take my word for this, the Defence Acquisition University in the United States did this decades ago, and there's a cost curve point. We commit 75% of the whole life cost in the concept phase of the life cycle, 75%. 95% is committed by the time you enter manufacturing. Your ability, therefore, to rapidly change or deal with a change in requirement, the further you get down the life cycle, means that you start to get, I think the inflection point is roughly around the point of going into manufacturing, where you've got the 95% commitment of whole life cost has been made around your decisions. But thereafter, requirements change can cost up to anything between 500 and 1,000 times the whole life cost. So if you're ripping out money at the front end on the basis that for upfront investment will give you a return on investment at the end, you're doing it's the wrong thing, because the emergent property has been missed. It's about understanding the defects in those areas earlier than you would typically have got them afterwards. So you're not changing requirements later in the life cycle.
Okay. So that's, I suppose it also comes down to Smurf as well. So to get to that 80%, you've got to have understood actually a lot about what your requirements are in the operations domain as well. But we don't necessarily know this. Let's say this railway is going to be, become operative in 10 years' time. Who's going to be the operations and maintenance teams? Who's actually going to? How do we tap into that? What's your thoughts on that? If we don't know the future, how are we going to start? How do you think we can start looking at that?
Well, it's
putting
tricky.
You on the spot.
Yeah.
Sorry, bud.
Sorry.
Putting you on the spot. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. No, well, it's kind of an open-ended question at the end of the day, isn't it? I mean, obviously we build hospitals for 25 years. I think it's supposed to be their lives, but how many of them are still hanging around with their temporary infrastructure? Again, schools, we're supposed to be only building them for 15, 20 years, but obviously it carries on. So yes, do you only look at that kind of operational life for the build intent, or do you look at the potential returns in the future that can kind of get? So it is really open-ended, isn't it? Where do you cut off that line of understanding where those returns definitely are? Because as we all know, obviously a lot of the whole life cycle cost is in the operation and maintenance side. And yeah, judging that line, I think is really tricky, especially obviously the factors of what's it being used for. Education, obviously, or healthcare increases that kind of risk worry about it as well, and et cetera. So yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of bring that all the way around again, because it's a great question. Where are we, Paul? There you are. Awesome question. Cheers, bud, because this is going to keep running. So I'm going to come back to Pete on that, because let's say, off the top of my head here, that you need to get to this 80%. We know that the operations and maintenance world needs to be a part of that conversation to get it to that point in time. We don't know who they're going to be yet. So let's say there's some existing owner operators out there who are doing similar sort of things. Okay. There's enough railway operators out there and maintenance companies out there that are doing that. Let's say that they could make some money on taking the data that they already have for the operations and maintenance, the kind of things that they need to do, the kind of information they need to require, and they can normalize that. They can potentially anonymize that and potentially sell that into a financial model of some sort.
You're really good at taking the words out of my mouth. No, it is. It is the same thing. It's like now with sensors. You don't charge people for the sensors. You chuck them in for free and charge them for the data. If your data is decent enough, and people are going to pay for it. But it's exactly what you're saying.
So there's a
With
potential
FM.
here that those FM people can make some money.
Yeah, no, I think we do need to flip it again. Say this data holder capitalist. It's like who owns it, kind of controls it at the day. Data's the new oil. Obviously, oil on its own is useless. You need to refine it and play with it. So, but I mean, I think one of the questions I'll probably answer next is like, what's the biggest questions about doing it? And to be honest, I think the holding of the data. It's like, if you're the end user, are you going to get your own servers and be able to deal with it? You can use Amazon, etc., or whatever. Or what a lot of people like doing is just outsourcing it to somebody else. So if you can turn it off to, because say FM don't manage buildings, they manage contracts for the buildings. They're managing the contracts with the people that are contracting the data for the building, and then turn that into a monetized element, which I think is a fantastic idea. I know you want us to argue and we're just agreeing, but yeah.
And I suppose actually that also is another potential for the delivery teams, because you're getting to a point in that potential 80% where the delivery team hasn't been nominated yet. The contracts hasn't been awarded yet because the funding isn't there. But the delivery teams will have requirements, information requirements. They'll have past experience of that, and will be able to once again do the same thing of normalizing and anonymizing that information potentially and selling that back into that stock market. So you can get to that 80% potentially before things start again. Now, this potentially might take away some of the work and money that either might own later on, but you're starting to get a regular set of information, because every time that information is used, Pete's Netflix, every time that information or your information that you've sold is used on that market, then you're going to get a kickback. It's like a service potentially.
Yeah, it's revenue generating as well for all of the parties involved.
So, Pete, this is going to be a really harsh question. Why haven't you done it, mate? What do you figure out, mate?
Where's the fucking money?
Okay, so we get back around to that first one. You know, we've got to have the money to chicken and egg. We've got to have the money to start with. Okay, so I mean, these are the questions that I threw in. So please do use that QR code. Throw a question here, provoke. Thanks for that, by the way. That was a good provoker to get that conversation going. So one of the questions that I have is always around information. It's always around plain language on information. That's what I like about the AI world, and why I mentioned it this morning about the Excel spreadsheet, being able to use AI, chat, GPT, put in a plain language. This is what I want to do. It spits you out a formula. You dump in your Excel spreadsheet and whoa, suddenly I'm an expert, which is fantastic. Plain language. Where have we got my plain language one? Oh, right at the very top there. Thank you very much for voting that to the top. I'm sure that was you, Sandy. It's always useful. So if there was a specific plain language question that would demonstrate, that would create a data set for each of your phases of the project, what would be the most valuable question you could have answered by a set of data? It's going to be a tricky one. But what's your most valuable question? If there's only one question you could ask and the data set will be there to answer it, what would that question be?
I think for me, it would be, what outcomes must I achieve?
So the kind of information data set that you are looking for there would be the strategy
Yeah, I mean, if
policy document.
yeah, look, give the context around East West Rail there. I said, you know, one of the things it can do is release 90 billion into the economy, something like that. But it's also about connecting people, connecting lives, and getting people to where they can work. Okay. So if that is the outcome for the project, for me as the information manager, for argument's sake, the custodian of all the engineering information, part of this project is what outcomes must I achieve in the area of my domain in order to meet that?
Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. And it is all about those outcomes. Because if you don't achieve those outcomes, you might as well not have bothered building anything or maintaining something or financing something in the first
What am
place.
I validating in order to get the money back and to give
Yeah. So
that's something he can work with?
Is my building working?
Is your building working? That's, I mean, absolutely. Is it functioning? And that was something that we looked at in the East West Rail world, was taking the list of outcomes that the client wanted to achieve and then working out the functions that would help you achieve those ones. So that function, are we actually achieving the function that will achieve the outcome, which will give the return on the investment, is probably it's actually this almost the same question, really, I suppose.
Has anybody sent in a question that's going to come up on his face, by the way? Because I've seen words coming at the side of his face, and I'm hoping.
Nobody's written bottom, and it's going to come up on my side of my face. Okay, we'll go right to the very, very top one there. Standardization of assets. So, is standardization of assets or buildings a solution to reducing the investment risk? So, this, I think, Tommy, where are you? There you are. So we're talking about kind of like almost like manufacturing, in the fact that we're going to produce the same thing. And you're right. I'll throw this at you first, but I'm going to stand on my soapbox for a few seconds. Absolutely right. We pay consultants to design a school again and again and again and again. And every time it needs to achieve the same function, the same outcomes, we have the same budget. Why are we redesigning the same thing over and over and over again? And if we can't have that standardization, then we really are not getting value for money. So I'm going to throw that down the line again. Pete.
So we build schools, but what we're really building is education. So education is the function, right? A school is just the means to provide education. So therefore, there's no reason why you shouldn't, or there shouldn't be standardization of school buildings, assets, because that's not the end goal, is it? Education is the end goal. So it would reduce risk because you know how to build it, and it's repeatable and scalable. That's a perfect.
Certainly standardization for an FM. I mean, as soon as we start, there's sort of two sides to this. Yes, obviously. If FM O&M know then that standard package plant room has been in play in places and it's got this outputs that's confirmed, so you've got a confirmed data set off of that standardized build, obviously you've got a really good foresight of information there. But obviously the issue with that is things change all the time. And as much as you want to standardize, more efficient pumps will come out. The data sets change. And yes, maybe you can plug that in as a kind of reactive, almost kind of simulation sort of aspect. But it at least reduces the risk of the unknown as things. So standardization is great, but it is also kind of boring, isn't it?
I can sort of see, there's an inner architect in there trying to destroy everything that the construction industry tries to do by telling us to build something that is completely impossible. But if education demands something that will help me teach or teach science in the best way, it's got to be the same all over the country. We can't have a different standard of outcome in the south to an outcome in the north to an outcome in Scotland or in Wales, because we need standard education across the board. So, that doing something differently every time, to me, is just is the vanity of an architect. Any architects in the room?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you could have a discussion 20 years ago, the need of education was completely different to the need of education today.
Yeah.
So what do you do with all of those old schools that you had that were all built? Look at Qatar, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, well, that's the great thing. I mean, annoyingly, the M&E, sorry.
Yeah.
Why did they go to school? Could be an argument to make. Stick it in front of them. Let's have it. That's what we pick up.
Yeah, I'd say there's a bit of a context thing there, though, isn't there? If I take a different domain, I'll go back in defence if I may again. One of the organisations I worked for, 70 years making missiles, various aggregations of companies till they got pan-European organisation today. 70 years of understanding and knowledge of building complex weapons. And yet, every time there's a need for a new class, start from scratch. Where's the generic functional architecture? Okay, every missile, in fact, every aircraft, every car for that matter, any mode of transport, guidance, navigation, control. 3 common generic functions. Why start from scratch? So standardization can help, but I totally agree with you. There's a context that needs to be applied.
Standardization works in certain environments. It doesn't work in every. The entire world will look exactly the same. Now, I would argue that from a human aesthetic perspective, that is not what we in the social interaction. Every single building in Brighton is exactly the same. Every single house is exactly the same. Every single office box is exactly the same.
They're different colours.
But we're not actually.
We're
not talking about houses.
I might argue the functionality again there, though. I don't need to look the same in order to achieve the same functionality.
But you're talking about, but that's not even, that's not one way somebody to design your building.
So we were just. So we were just talking about schools and how many schools you have here in the city. Not a huge amount. And if I built a new school, each of those science blocks inside that new school, if I built it differently in each one, cost me a lot more money. There's no bottomless pit of money, is there? And why? Well, we're not doing that at the moment, but that was the question. We weren't talking about renovating an existing school because the buildings will all be different. Correct? Yeah, we're all going to have to shoehorn a functionality into a different location. So yeah, okay. Talking about different things.
What if architects designed a whole suite of components that can be reconfigured to suit the aesthetics of the location where education as the function is being provided? Therefore, you've then got repeatable, standardized, adaptable, amenable, space changing environments that suit the environment that provides education. Maybe it's to do with the architectural design. Yeah. That might be, well, I know it's aesthetic, but it's vast and broad, and everyone wants to create something brand new. but there's got to be a point where even if you create something absolutely brand new, it's made up of at least 90–80% of standardized components, which can then be reconfigured
Yes.
into a completely different space on another project.
Yeah. So standardization of function, standardization of components, but an ability to configure those components into anything that fits the locale, the environment, and the outcome that you want to achieve.
Yeah, like components on the shelf that's designed for second life.
Gotcha.
And modularity and reuse. Modularity and reuse. Yeah.
Well, in a way, we kind of need to standardize anyway, because if we want to start getting into this world of the digital again, if we want to start using generative design to just design our buildings at the push of a button, we need standardized pieces. We need to have those jigsaw pieces that the GD can look at and be able to use. I mean, the fantastic example, Brighton Woods, with their sort of automation software for pharmacies, medical centers out in Africa. It's fantastic. As soon as they understand those standardized components and then you know to build, they could just stretch it. Yeah.
But I still think it comes back to some pure foundations though, because and I do agree with you around what you said. What is it for? What are you using for? What's the intended life cycle?
Yeah.
You know, build for modularity and reuse, repurposing. Start thinking circular economies on it.
Okay. So I'm going to pick on Craig because the other guy says he's anonymous. So Craig asks, where are you, Craig? You are. Okay. So why do you think FM teams are so slow in realizing the value of BIM digital for asset management? Designers, contractors get it for the construction.
Yeah, it does thrill me, this one, because it is a fantastic opportunity. There's great data coming through. You've got, all right, it's in an Excel form or whatever, but it's still there, it's sort of usable. And I'm still trying to grasp I think it does come down to a kind of cultural side, to be honest. It's this element of, especially in an existing building with an adaptation, it's, oh, but how do I align this with all these other crap I've got here? It means changing the wheel a bit and I'll have to use that system to do that bit of the building and then my existing to the other bit. On the new builds, it's kind of interesting because obviously you've got it straight from scratch. You've got a perfect data set you can start playing with. But then again, that kind of element of it just cascades back to the old school. It is my CD O&M with my files on. I'll just keep it that way, even though you've got a sexy 3D model that you can know above that ceiling tile. You've got a valve and what valve that is and manufacture, etc. So I don't think there's a singular answer there. I think it's just this case of I've got legacy estate. It's too difficult to bring it in. I've got new build. I don't have the system to be able to pay for it. It's more platforms I've got to train up on. And it sounds really awful, but that kind of cultural element of the FM world being quite senior, keep it simple, but it's bad because we need to get them. When you've got Bob, the maintenance guy who's had 50 years on site, who knows that building inside and out, and when he's gone, that's gone. You need to start extracting that out. This is why I think there's a great opportunity in the kind of digital twin element on legacy estate. How am I doing it to get that driven out of them? And I can't remember who said this. I mean, this could be a great idea of apprentices because you can dual up. If you bring an apprentice who's digitally evolved with somebody who's very building evolved and then get them to work hand in hand while one can train the other, then you come to a nice middle ground and it helps broach that cultural gap. And more importantly, get that data set out of that mind and start understanding the digital environment better. So yeah, sorry, a bit long-winded there, but it's not an easy single one. And I think culture is a big aspect to it. So
I think it starts early in the life cycle. Ian. It's not just the FMs, it's in the design world as well. Design managers, area managers, those type of project managers. It gets in the way of time cost. You need to invest in these things. And I think if I link to that question below, the bottomless budget, education and training and the support that goes with it. You know, the tools are not intuitive. You know, they're not like smartphones. You can't just pick it out of the pocket and start using it. They need some intellectual interaction with them, you know, to use them to good effect. And that takes investment. And guess what? When you're on deadlines, when you've got milestones to meet, what gets pushed out the way? The stuff that you really don't know, the stuff that's difficult to do, goes into the difficult to do bin. And therefore, by the time it gets to the point at which you want to bring the FMs in the OMN land, well, most of the opportunity is lost. A very personal view there, but I think that's what I've seen, and not just in the BIM space. We've seen this. I think certainly saw this in the product lifecycle management world, in products, in manufacturing.
do you, so perhaps a controversial thought here, and obviously I'll open to be beaten for this one. But when we were starting out on that BIM world, and I was talking to FM contractors, a lot of their money was earned time and materials. And if I didn't know where something was, and I didn't know what tools to take with me, and I didn't know how to fix something, I would go out, I would look at it and go, oh, okay, fair enough. And then go back to the office, find that information, spend a lot of time drinking coffee, whatever it might be, and then go back out to site and try and find that. And that one thing might take me a whole day. So the incentive to me in that contract isn't necessarily to be able to do something quickly. It's, well, I'll get to it, but I'm not being paid necessarily to do it quickly.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, that, because I think that's one of the challenges for leveraging digital methods to do things cheaper, quicker, better than the norm, and getting some decent return on investment. If there's no incentive model for people to use them to leverage things for quicker, why would you? I think that's exactly your point. So I think there is definitely a challenge in there, the way that we do contracting.
Yeah.
But that's getting right out of my field. So,
I mean, I'm not a fan of contracted FM, if honest. Certainly from dealing with some sort of auditing side and the DIO side on some sort of estates, and it becomes almost like these certain contracted FM parties when they're hiding things. They're making sure that this certain things isn't shown and dealing with stuff, and then the handover of the data sets is really poor. It's just not very well combined, and it's again kind of them covering their asses or something like this. So, but I think that comes down to a bit of a stick that's being used if they do something wrong. So we need to have a more open playground where we can just be, look, if something goes wrong, it's fine, let's deal with it, not chastise for things sort of going wrong, so we don't have this protect your ass type environment, and be more open in dealing with things. But yeah, contracted FM I find tricky.
So potentially we sort of come back around to the money side, is if we can incentivize the FM people better, then they're going to ask or get involved earlier, ask for the right things to be delivered in the right formats, in the right way. So therefore that they can deliver their outcomes cheaper and quicker, and then go and sit down and.
But the issue we have there, unfortunately, is FM aren't digitally mature enough to know what that is. So we need to focus a lot more training, education, digital evolution, digital maturity on FM, so they can understand what data they want to tell everybody else what they want and not be told what they're getting. Because if they can start dictating, they'll start using it more. They'll see the benefits more. They'll understand the value propositions better, and they'll get better returns, and then buy into it more. But if they're always going to be kind of on the dinghy behind the cruise ship, then they're never going to catch up, and it's going to run off in a different direction. And we need more focus on FM, definitely.
Okay. So I'm going to go with one last question here, was the anonymous one on here. So it says, YouTubers like the B1M always talk about the construction projects happening around the world. The trend is that bureaucracy increases costs. Is this solvable? That's quite a wide sweeping question.
Well, is it maybe two aspects of that? There's bureaucracy and governance, isn't there? I mean, end of the day, the Building Safety Act. Obviously, you could call that kind of bureaucracy because it's making things difficult. They've got to put more elements in, but actually, it's obviously improving things, and it's creating opportunities. It's creating an opportunity to understand your risks better, start using digitalization as a route to be able to manage that better, and start getting on board. So again, it sticks. So it's, yes, other type of bureaucracy can be bad, but again, that line between governance and it is that governance type point. We it might, I'm not entirely convinced it increases costs. Just, is there whoever is anonymously wants to type in just a little bit more information to give us the example? Yourself at the back. Good. Do you want to? Okay. Yeah. Expand a little bit on that one.
Yeah, for sure. So I hear from a lot. I've got some friends that work in the construction industry, and sometimes I just watch random videos on YouTube just to learn about how things are made in the world. And it seems like there are certain countries that cut through red tape, which obviously has its negatives, right? So what's the less two evils path? is probably doing things the right way and keeping people safe and doing things the right way for the long term. But there are some construction projects around the world where they create things or they fix things blisteringly fast. And then you look at, well, for example, the thing that I was just learning about from the internet was like HS2, like that was meant to cost what, 36 billion, something like that. And it was meant to reach up until Scotland, but then it cost 120 billion and rising, I think, and it's only reached up into Birmingham. So the reason for that, from what I've seen from people on Reddit or online, they say it's because of bureaucracy and a lot of red tape and a lot of things and hoops you have to jump through that increases costs. So I'm just wondering if, obviously you folks are more experts in the construction industry. So is that something that's solvable maybe through better planning, like using digital twins or software, or just spending a bit of time thinking about the long term before you commit to something big like that?
Absolutely.
I mean, bureaucracy is built into it. I mean, you've just got to accept it's there. There's, of course, there's a cost to it. And by that, I mean, there is always going to be some kind of regime that you've got to satisfy. In this country, we've got there's a saying, isn't there? An Englishman's home's his castle. Apologies to the Welsh and the Scots in it. You get what I'm saying. So therefore, when we start planning a railway that's going through somebody else's backyard, there's going to be objections to that. And those people need to be able to object. This is not like other countries in the world where those objections aren't heard. And if some government wants a railway, they'll build it and they will displace you. And they don't really care. And we know those nations exist, those countries exist. So what we've got to do, I think, and the politics comes into this now, and I'm no politician, I'm an engineer, and I want to stay firmly an engineer. But there is a certain amount of politics in here that has to probably change in the way we think about complex programs, because it's not just infrastructure programs, as you see in large scale defense as well. They go over budget, and it's not just about the planning in those. We're not helped sometimes by, if you look at the life cycle of a big program, certainly one that goes over 10 to 15 years, there will be a change in the colour of the government during the time that project's in its design and build phases. Absolutely given. The aircraft carriers did that. Our railway will almost certainly do that. HS2's definitely done it. And that becomes challenging because you're then up against political ideals, not just about bureaucracy, but about whether the thing should be there or not in the first instance. So, it's whether we accept that the type of country we live in is one where we want to protect certain rights, and that means there's going to be challenge, and that will introduce cost. And whether we then build that into our cost models and understand that that's what it's going to cost in the first instance, that's going to need political will to accept that. It's going to need Treasury to accept that investment. You can't keep having this push down on capital cost. You've got to look at whole life cost. And I think for me, that's the paradigm shift that's got to happen. We've got to look away from capital cost to look at whole life cost across the expected and a reasonable expected life cycle of whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah. Pete.
I think maybe, it begins to wind me up. I should have explained right at the beginning, I'm a 30-year in the industry area arse builder who got very creative through tube lines and then through Crossrail, and eventually got asked to go and jump the fence into the finance world, which I spent 6 years creating the world's first infrastructure exchange, global infrastructure exchange. And what I did with that, I brought my construction knowledge and frustration into that and created a data business that was attached to that exchange. That's my involvement with the financial side. And from what I've learned over those 6 years is not the bureaucracy leading up. The reason why these projects take so long to build momentum to even get maybe even near 13% design. The other side of the fence don't care. They have got facilities waiting. They are ready to rip your hand off once you've got a project that is mature and it has sensible data, standardized data with it. The moment you kind of got all your toys in the pram, the money will bite your hand off. There are professional, private, family office institutions all waiting actively searching to invest in infrastructure projects. Maybe this is the frustrate. Maybe that's the reason why I kind of got frustrated and flustered. I told you I was the black sheep. Well, I'm getting a little bit annoyed now. So look, I'm talking better. So I'm a doer. I'm not a talker. I'm a thinker. I don't tend to present to people, but suddenly come out of my shell, bit like a rabid dog that after 5 minutes is now sitting laying down next to you, all nice and peaceful. But I just think from what I've learned in the finance side is that the money is there waiting. We just cannot see it because there's this massive wall which the industry built many years ago, and it doesn't seem to be able to see over the top of the wall. That's in essence the feeling behind, why we'll stop watching B1M. Maybe that's, unsubscribe from their YouTube channel. Maybe that's one way to solve it.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking of the bureaucracy side of things and going back to the question there. My experience on looking at a lot of those projects is there is always some sort of interference right at the very, very beginning when you have a project and you say you can do it for 17 billion and somebody else says, well, you've got to deliver the same for 15 billion because that's what we've got. It sounds like the money's there anyway. It's just a potentially a political point. But
in my mind, even yes, you said it would be 100 million, but it's turned into now 600 million. Is that what you're now saying?
Yeah.
But if they had standardized data and the bond and the data is on a secondary market, they'll be earning the money that they're losing on the project. They will be earning more from the trading of the project and the project bond and the data throughout that construction phase. They'll probably make more than they're losing.
So potentially, if we get that bureaucracy correct, it's not going to cost more. It's actually going to allow us to earn more money from the project and deliver it with everybody earning a better percentage, a better margin on that, potentially.
Yeah, I think there's another challenge that construction and infrastructure has that you don't see in product world. So in the product world, I understand that the first in class is always going to be more expensive if I want to leverage different methods. And I realize the return on investment in the subsequent versions. So first in class, second, third, fourth, whatever. I realize savings as a result of the investment I put up front. If you're building a unique railway system from point A to point B, you don't get a second in class.
No.
If you're building a complex building, retail park, whatever it is, metro system, transportation system, you're doing a one-off. So the trick then is how to leverage that investment you do need to put up front. And that really takes, I think, some of the things that Pete's been talking about, and then really leaping forward, looking at the end state and saying, right, in the operational world, how do we use what we've done now and invested now to make it more affordable to operate and maintain?
Yeah. Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you for that question. Really good. We're going to wrap up there because we are, I'm sorry, 2 minutes over the end of our time. So just a massive thank you to Pete, Ivan and Matt. Thank you very much.